Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Back after our 1 week off, our summer vacation break, etc. We're back to school. We're back to fall. It's cyclocross season, or it feels a little more like cyclocross season. I'm stoked. This is totally my year. Definitely my year. You know what? This might be my year.
Your year for what?
Cyclocross.
Oh,
we're coming back.
I wasn't aware that was happening, but
nope.
Okay, well, welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. This is Molly here. I guess we could introduce Molly Herford. She is an author, and I am Peter Glassford. I think this comes in the intro before this, but I am a cycling coach and kinesiologist. So we are here. We are back. We are answering, I think, one question today. As always, there's many factors involved in answering the question, so we'll try and do our best with that. And then we have a couple of sort of news and noteworthy concepts or news items, I guess, that have come from races. It's been a lot of races. There have been a lot of races happening over these last couple of weeks, so we thought we'd highlight that. And then you also did a bit of an FKT solo Vision Quest journey as well during this 1 week of rest that we took.
Super fun vacation, as it turned out.
Okay. So where did you want to start? We have these couple news items. We have your FKT, and then we have this question.
Okay, well, why don't we hit the news items, and then we can, I think that actually lends itself into the...
I will tease. The question is about sort of like, should you do some training when you're tired, or like maybe the iteration is when you're tired all the time, how do you do quality work, and how do you work through that? So we're going to deal with sort of fatigue and training, and fatigue and intervals, fatigue and sort of doing hard work, I guess. So that's the question we'll tease, and then we'll go through these news items and your FKT.
Okay, well, where do you want to start on news items? Do you want to start with UTMB? I mean, it happened just over a week ago as we're recording. So
on the long weekend, there's that whole week leading into that Labor Day weekend, and there's several races that are part of this UTMB week, are all sort of around Mont Blanc in France, largely. I believe the race goes into a couple different countries as it goes around the big race, the one that's over 100 miles. But there's a couple other ones at 100K and I think a 50K, and there's probably a couple other ones as well. But this is sort of like the biggest race, or one of the biggest races, the most like noteworthy to win. A lot of careers are made by even just podiums in UTMB.
Yeah, I'd say it's, outside of North American racing, it's the biggest one in the world. I'm going to say Western States and is probably like on par with it if you're in the ultra running world, but UTMB I think is right there. And
I think when you look at the amount of people, it is very busy. The town it's not a massive town, but it is lined and for hours and hours and hours. Right. There's no other race for ultra running that's like that.
No, and I mean, this one is interesting because they also run a few race distances compared to a lot of the big races that people know about. Javelina 100, Leadville, Western States, it's 100-miler, and that's your option. And to some extent, that's actually almost the allure of the race, is that like to do it, you're going to have to run the 100 miles. But UTMB, or like the race as a whole, race organization as a whole, has a lot of different distances. I do find it funny that, what do they say their short course is? They call it it's like the very tiny race, and it's still like,
oh, it's the community race, and it's 50K or 60K.
Yeah, the community race is 50K. Hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we're at, I guess. Inflation. So I guess things that I noticed, so Jim Walmsley was back. Jim's one of my favorite ultra runners, maybe my favorite ultra runner, I guess. So he came back and he won the 100K. I'm pretty sure it's 100K. It might be a slightly different. They call it, I don't even want to do the acronyms. It's like CCC, I think is that one. And so it was sort of exciting at the end. There was like a sprint. He got passed in the aid station. They have these like soda water dispensers, and then he rallied back and passed the other person he was racing and sort of got it. And so that was sort of exciting. A lot of time in ultra running, it's sort of just people disappear into the woods and come out of the woods in a certain order. So that one was exciting to watch. And then the women's race, of course, in the main show, the big 100 and whatever it is, 110 mile race, it was amazing, really, really exciting. Lots of lead changes. So Courtney Dauwalter, who is, I guess, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, was in there. She was leading. She was in the lead group at 3, then she was leading, and then she sort of just came apart. And the weather was very, very bad going into the nighttime because this race takes, 20 plus hours. I think. And so, yeah, she fell apart but kept going. And so it was really interesting watching someone who, could have dropped out. I think the way they said the points went is it actually would have been better for her to drop out the way the series standings work or something, which I didn't quite understand. But she finished 10th. And so she walked a lot. But watching, they had great footage of all the aid stations in this race, which I'll try and timestamp when either she comes through or some of the others come through. And it's just, you can see them. Everyone has their little table with their support staff. And just, I don't know, I could watch it all day, just how people.
And you did watch it all day.
What they have on the table, what are their gels? Like, do they have options? How are they handling the weather? So a lot of people would change their shirt and their coat to sort of get dry stuff or for the different phases of the course. Poles are used in this race as well, which is a little different compared to the other two races Molly mentioned with Western States and Leadville. It was just interesting watching someone who was having a bad day just go through it with grace. She would still wave at the crowds. Just really, really, really neat. And how she dealt with her support staff. There was no screaming or there's probably tears at some point, but no just big shows, just she got through it and one foot in front of the other. So that was just so cool to see. That's why someone like that is great, is it's those hard days, right? Like, what is the worst case for them? So
yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I had there, you're going to have to remind me, but the one I recall is that there was just this offhand mention in the telecast about France for the trail race, Trail World Championships. They had something in their qualifications, like the criteria that the runners who qualified then had to commit and sign off that they wouldn't race a certain distance I think it was a month beforehand. So wouldn't do like an ultra.
I think it was 60 days. Or no, you're right, 30 days.
So I tried to find it just to fact check because it was one of the announcers said it and they could be forgiven for having the wrong country or the wrong rule or number of days or whatever. I couldn't find it. So take that with a grain of salt that this is now third hand to you. But I did find that India actually has a very explicit rule that I did find the criteria for, and I believe it's for that. It's for one of these ultra things, and where it was like 2 months out, there's nothing over, I think they said 100K, and maybe a certain number of hours, and then a month out, what was it? It's like nothing over 50K or 23K or something like that. So all that to say, I thought that was interesting that these federations are putting this on their fastest, fittest athletes. To say, like, you can't be doing a lot of ultras. You can't be tired coming into this big race. And this relates to some of the podcasts we've done and questions we've gotten over fatigue, and perhaps the one today about training tired, where it's like, well, how quickly can I recover to go to another race? I did Leadville. Now I want to do whatever race.
Well,
can I do it?
Yeah, it's funny, as we're going to talk about my attempt here from the last week, I've now had a few people be like, so like, would you go back next week and try it? I'm like, why on earth?
Yeah, do the test again. Yeah, you get that with like 20-minute tests. People will fail it and then they want to do it the next day. Like, let me test again. And it's like, well, I mean, that's not really the point.
I also want to put fail in extreme quotation marks there.
Well, it is. It's all information. And I always, in the 20-minute test, right, it's like, okay, well, now you have information about it. Like, train for a month and try and get better and recover or whatever the limitation was. You don't need to do another test to prove your worth or something. It would make more sense to go ahead and do like 2x20 as an interval workout and finish it and develop fitness and pacing. So I thought that was worth mentioning, just that there's these rules for the highest level athletes who are at some level professional or doing it seriously. So for the rest of us, it's worth considering, if I'm going to do something like that, how many of these can we do? I know a lot of people were looking at Leadville and then trying to do like Tahoe, whatever the Tahoe distance is, I'm blanking on. It's like 100K, say. It's like 2 or 3 weeks out. I have a athlete doing this. It's a tour, but it's like their most important event. And the group just did back-to-back 200Ks and as a ride, like, this is riding, again, normal people stuff, but what did this rule just like these people are putting in? So when you say like, we're doing this as part of like, is it part of a taper? Because that's not what tapering, right? It's sort of this interesting thing. So I just put that as like, again, I've said it on a few recent podcasts, like, not just what I'm saying, but like, these things are out there where this is an actual criteria. If you want to race for this nation, you can't go doing that. So I think it's worth, like, is our rule 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, being careful in the weeks, and months ahead of the big race.
For sure. And I think this is a good one, whether, obviously not everyone listening to this is going to be racing world championships. I think it's actually a great one to keep in mind when you have a race that like didn't go great, but still was like the duration or distance that you had planned to do. It's one thing if you're doing a 200K gravel race and you get a flat or, horrible your derailleur goes like 5K in, so you only got 5K in. Okay, fine. Sign up for a race the next weekend. Do that. But if you did the 200K and you just didn't do as well as you wanted to or didn't get what you wanted to, that doesn't mean that you should immediately sign up for something in a couple weeks to quote unquote make up for it.
It's a difficult one. My gut reaction is to say no, just stick to the plan you had for the season, but not everyone has a plan beyond, and you've championed that, or you sort of do the race and then figure out what you're going to do. So if there is nothing else after, you're fit, you haven't gotten fatigued and tired, then I could see doing something else. I'd lean towards, if this was like a Leadville thing, a bucket list thing that was a lot of travel and expense to do it, I would lean towards doing something more local and just doing a great job on that versus spending a whole bunch more money trying to get away and prove yourself abroad. And then thinking maybe next year, this is something like that you might do. It's a tricky one. That's my gut reaction, but I can see how I still have this energy and this fitness. I want to use it. So, yeah.
Also, you have a note here, Ludo. He's I think one of these consummate athletes that we love and probably someone we should try and reach out to. I don't know what his interviews are, because he is, I think he maybe was born in Quebec and then now lives in France, if I remember right. Don't fact check me on that, but we've mentioned him, I think, before. And this Ludo, he's 50. He just turned 50. He won the Hard Rock, which I watched that entire race. It was amazing. Jim Walmsley. It was so boring.
Jim Walmsley paced him there. We watched 7 hours of footage, on and off, but I pretty much watched 7 hours of footage so that I could see Jim and Ludo running in through the mountains. And it was not great drone footage, and it was maybe 10 minutes, but it was amazing. So good. But he's just a super great athlete. And his story, I've posted this for show notes before, but I'll try and find them again and post them. Just some stories about him, this Ludo, who was 6th in UTMB, the biggest race. He's 50. And he did Hard Rock earlier in the season and won it. Just amazing. But his training is pretty reasonable. It's not super high mileage. Some cross training. He has a job and a family, and I think he renovated a house last year. So I think just a really, really cool athlete. We love it. Cross training. He's a little older. He still goes in there and slugs it out. And again, was first, but then he was 6th. Right? He was only in it because now he's getting this name as, a pretty solid runner, and 50 is pretty impressive to be in there with people who are 25 and 30. So I thought that was the only other big news piece there as far as things that our listeners might be interested in.
Love it. And then a more local shout out. We have an ultra runner who has reset the Bruce Trail FKT for self-supported.
That's right.
Yeah. If anyone's heard us talk about the Bruce Trail, we helped crew our friend Karen to the supported. It was the overall record. I think now it's the women's record. A few years ago now. This is the unsupported record, which means it's more fast packing, I would say.
And I think there's 3, right? So Karen was super supported. So she was supported. So that was the supported FKT. So we had a van and she didn't have to carry anything. People could run with her. She always ran with someone pretty much the whole day. It was amazing. Such a good community thing, especially during the pandemic. So that's supported. Nothing you want for nothing, basically, aside to stop running at some point. You can sleep. We would drive to hotels or to friends' houses along the way. Then there's also, as far as I understand, you can correct me, Molly, there's this gentleman, what's his name, Josh? Oh, I thought I wrote his down. I'm so sorry. I'll post it to the show notes. I apologize to this person. So he had already got it. Someone beat him by a couple hours, and then he came back and got it. It's now 12 days for this 900-kilometer trail that goes from Niagara Falls to up to Tobermory in Ontario. So it's very, very long and very, very rugged. It goes along this Niagara escarpment that comes by where we are in Collingwood. And so our friend did this supported, and then I was explaining this. There's also self-supported, but there's also unsupported. And so he did, what did I write down? Unsupported, which I think means you have to carry everything. There's a picture in the Canadian Running article that I'll link where he had all his food. Every day was a bar, a kind bar, and then some Oreos, and then this. And he had it lined up for all 12, 13 days. And so I think he carried that in filtered water and had a pack. And his pack weighed 5.5 pounds. So I think the other option is what was it? Unsupported or self-supported?
Self-supported.
And I think that allows you then to stop at stores. But I think I could be completely wrong.
I feel like there's a bit more nuance to it,
Okay.
or like a bit more of like
Okay.
a thing. I think unsupported, you can stop at stores, but you can't like cash food.
Okay. Or have like your family drop stuff or anything like that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So maybe I don't know the definitions, but it's pretty impressive that this person
Yeah, it's very
essentially walked 900K in 12 days. It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of FKT attempts.
So then, yeah, I thought it was just a good segue to you doing this FKT. So you also were doing, are you going to call it unsupported, I guess?
Unsupported, yeah.
Yeah, you did carry it. You did filter. So by my definitions,
Unsupported, self-supported, whatever you want to call it, totally solo. So actually, I guess people might remember I was initially signed up for a 100-miler that would have happened. We're recording this Sunday. It would have happened yesterday. But frankly, by the time we got into August, we had so much on our plates. We just moved. We had this family trip. Just so many work things were coming up, and the time to go do the pre-run that I wanted to do in order to do the 100-miler like effectively and like do what I wanted to do at it just wasn't there. So I made the call that it didn't really make sense in our current life to do that when just like where we were going to be for this like family trip. We actually were only a couple hours away from the little Cloche Silhouette Trail in Killarney Provincial Park, which if you've been listening to the podcast or reading the blog for a while, you know, is sort of my white whale.
I think a lot of us, there's a lot of our friends have done it. We had Eric Batty on years ago, who I did it with years and years and years ago. We set the original, I don't know if this is original FKT, but we had the FKT together for a while.
Well, you and I have run it. So technically speaking, I've never filed for it because I didn't really feel it as though it was like the best effort, but like we could have the supported female. I could have the supported female FKT from the time we ran
because
it.
we ran together.
We ran together, which still annoys the crap out of me. And I don't know if they've updated the rules for fastest known time. I doubt they have. But if you had set the record then, you could have said it was unsupported. But because I'm a woman, but because I had you running with me, a man, I'm supported. It's this really BS
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I think even aside, because we may be misrepresenting all of these unsupported, supported things, but I think that the heart of the challenge was you had this urge for some reason to do this 80K, 50 mile, roughly, very rugged thing. It takes about 3 hours to 4 hours longer than most people would run a 50 mile. And people always get really ambitious and say that they're going to beat it. And then they find out that the trail is so rugged. It's almost rock climbing at times, very rocky. Navigation is very tricky because it's just these little blazes that are hard. You know, the trees fall down and it's on rock, so it fades. So it's very, very hard to do it. So most people, Ryan Atkins, who's been world obstacle course champion, and Lindsay Webster, who's also done that as well, very fit people, have the two records for men and women, and their times I would say are probably in that 3 to 4 hours more than they would run a normal whatever normal 50K off-road trail means. It's a very slow 50 miler.
Yeah, absolutely. I decided to try it. So we, kind of got ready for it. We've, like I said, done it before, but I've never done anything like this as far as like unsupported in the wilderness, totally solo.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing. Like you're in Canadian wilderness surrounded by lakes and little mini mountains.
It's actually very funny. We were talking to one of our honorary nieces yesterday, and she's like, but there's like places you can like refill your water bottle. And she meant like there's like water fountains
like one of those taps that measure the number of bottles they've saved.
And she was so perplexed when we were trying to explain that no, there aren't. They also were like completely shocked and like pretty appalled. I think that we might have talked them out of hiking as we were explaining like the
filtering water.
But no, I was going to say the outhouse situation, which is not an outhouse. Along this trail, all of the campsites have thunder boxes, so not even an outhouse, just a box with a hole under it.
Yeah, like a graduate. It's like a nice hole in the ground.
Yeah, a nice hole in the ground that you don't have to dig. It's great.
So you went after we knew Lindsay's time. You were going to go and see what you could do. You were feeling good. You had some pretty good fitness.
And I missed it by under 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So very frustrating. I'm not going to lie. And frankly, I want to take full responsibility. However, I'm going to throw my watch under the bus here. And I don't even throw it under the bus in a way that I'm mad at the watch company. I think this is just how GPS has improved over the years, actually. But from doing it before, I knew that the course is around 46.3 miles. 46.5 if you assume a couple little stops for water, a couple turnaround, whatever. By the time I finished, my watch measured 47.9, which means I was a mile and a half over what my planned time was. So, I knew I was going to be tight on it. I knew I was going to be close to the record, but with 10K to go, and even counting down from that, 5K to go, 4K to go, I was still very much convinced that I would have it by 10 minutes. Because the trail is so rugged, so weird, you kind of don't know where you are on it. So suddenly I'm at 46 miles and it's occurring to me that time is ticking down and I know that I'm not close to the finish yet. I'm aware enough to realize I'm, at least a kilometer from it. So I sprinted for all I was worth, but you can only sprint so fast on that, very rugged, rooty, rocky single track. Ended up missing it by just a couple minutes, which, hurts a lot. But at the same time, I'm a 38-year-old non-professional ultra runner going for a record that is held by a woman who was the world champion when she set it. Mm-hmm. So I can only feel so bad about that, frustrating as it might be. And I mean, the thing is, would I rather have missed it by 2 hours? Right? That's what I kind of had to start reflecting on when I was oh, crap, 2 minutes. Are you kidding me? That just sucks. And I know it would have sucked way more to miss it by
sure,
hours and hours.
Yeah. And so it's, I think it's similar that you look at these things and you say, you're just not going to win every event you enter. And these series of events that we enter can be, again, tours, it can be FKT attempts or trying to beat your own time or whatever. We just don't win every day.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what's interesting about whether it's you're racing your old time, you're racing for a certain time on a course, you're, whatever you're doing, if you're thinking about time, I think what this really reminded me about is that so many things are going to play into how your time goes, right? So, for example, it's been really dry here. So the bright side was my feet stayed pretty dry. The downside was the only water along the course was pretty gross and not super easy to access. So, instead of having wet feet, I spent more time having to get water. And I had a couple times where I was pretty much out of water as I was running and, the stress of that.
And the filtering was very slow because it was very dirty water.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, the trail had a lot more downed trees than we've had in the past. Or, it was it's towards the end of the season. So the maintenance of it, because not as many people are on it, it's pretty overgrown. So my legs are still scratched to hell from it.
Yeah. And I mean, the reality is with those things, right? You can start thinking about those last 10, 20 minutes, but it's really over 11 hours and whatever it was. It's just little percentages lost to whatever, right?
Oh, yeah.
Trees, navigation, or just pace, right? It's pushing harder and you can look back and be like, oh, I should have been pushing that extra 0.5%.
For sure. Yeah. Or, kicking myself because I can point to 3 or 4 times where I lost 2 minutes to navigation, where I'd be standing up on the shield rock and realizing that I'd passed wherever the turn was and needed to kind of backtrack. And, ultimately I'm pretty proud of how I didn't panic out there, because there were definitely a couple times where I was up on the rock and realizing I was looking around and I was I can't even really see where I came from. I'm not 100% positive. I can't see any cairns, the little rock, where people build up rocks to kind of point you in the right direction. Couldn't see any blazes. And the claustrophobia you feel in those times, even though you're in the middle of, expansive wilderness, you feel very trapped because you're holy crap, this could be bad. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So to do that and never panic or, go into a really dark place, that was good. I did realize, though, that and I bet you this is true of most people, but it was a really good reminder. My self-talk is so bad. Like a lot of the time. I think, I've done a lot of racing and stuff, but I'm in races. There are people around. I've done long runs with you, but you're there. I've done runs with friends and they're there. So while you do get in your own head during races at times, rarely are you in your head for so long that like you start really hearing those negative voices that start cropping up.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying too, like the thing is that trail is so hard. There's a lot of climbing in it. You said it was more than Leadville, but it's half the distance of Leadville.
It's slightly under Leadville, but it's half the distance.
Okay. And so it's also just vigorous, right? So generally self-talk gets more aggressive as it gets harder and you want to give up.
Yeah, I had to start reminding myself like, yes, of course it's hard. You're going up. And I'd like look down at my watch and it'd be like 35% gradient. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's why it's hard. Like that's why you feel terrible right now.
Okay, well, that's probably good. I thought the only other thing was just as far as equipment, because it was the exposure, we were using a spot tracker. So if anyone is considering doing this or something like that, the spot trackers, the Garmin InReach, a lot of those are pretty good to have. Some people are now looking at some of the SOS features on phones, but the one thing that does come with these spot trackers and InReach is they do have the ability to access like helicopter emergency support and cover that cost, I believe, as well. So they are not they're not that cheap, but you want to consider that, I think, when you're getting into these really exposed situations.
I was going to say, yeah, the cost of having to pay for the evacuation would have been hundreds of times the cost of activating the spot tracker.
And I think more importantly, like the thing with wilderness, they say wilderness rescue is any time where it's like longer than 45 minutes to get to a hospital, whatever. Like I'm sure there's lots of definitions, but this one would be like, I mean, if they got you out in 20 hours, it'd probably be fast in some cases, depending on where you were, right? Because it's all these lakes and there's no place to like land a helicopter.
So I actually I almost stopped and checked it because at one point there was definitely a helicopter like looking for a place to land.
Press the button by accident?
And I had this panic that I'd pressed the button and they were trying to find me.
So just considering that for sure, because this would then like it sends your GPS coordinates and sends like messages, and then also like my phone number and your phone number gets sent to them, and we sort of have like what you're doing in there. So I think worth considering that stuff if you are considering something that gets into these like extreme situations.
For sure. And yeah, we really thought through what I needed to carry, and it might seem excessive to some people, but I think I carried everything I needed in case I was out all night, because we knew I was going to be out all day for sure. But we knew I'd be close to when it starts getting dark out. So I did bring a small headlamp. We knew there's risk involved. Like I've seen what happens. I've, did my ankle in at Leadville, and I recognize how hard that would have been to get out if I'd done my ankle somewhere on that
Guess
trail.
It would have been good preparation because you did hike for over 10 miles. On that, so you would have been able to get yourself somewhere.
It would have been slow though. So I had an emergency bivvy. So picture an emergency blanket, but it's actually more of like a sleeping bag, and it rolls up. It's hefty, but it is small enough to fit in a pack. I had some like pieces of moleskin for blisters. I always carry a safety pin in my pack for either needing to safety pin, something to my pack or like part of my pack if it like ripped or something. And then we use a Katadyn filter for filtering water. So it's a soft flask with a filter on the top. I wish I had brought iodine tabs, to be honest. I didn't, which I'm mad about because we had them. Just because of how crummy the water was and how fast I was trying to push it through the filter. I was a little nervous that there was going to be an issue a couple days later. But luckily, we're 6 days out and all systems are fine. Okay, so this all leads very nicely into the question about training while tired. I guess, do you want to just open with that? Do you want me to get into the specifics of this question, or
maybe read that, maybe exclude names, but yeah.
Okay, so we were asked, what do you think about training tired? I've been taking 2 days off in a row and finding I have a lot more energy on the first day back. And I recall you saying that I should take full recovery between intervals to hit them harder. I feel like this is like two different questions to some extent.
Yeah, it sort of adds that wrinkle. I mean, it is specific in some ways, I guess, because you could say a lot of things about fatigue. So I guess that's good. So this is a friend and someone I've worked with a bit, like consulting and plans and stuff over the years. Very good cyclist. But, person who's got lots going on in life and stuff too. They're not like a professional cyclist, but very good. And so I think the way I describe this, we were riding today and I was describing this. And so with training, when you think about fatigue and just the draining process, there's sort of this idea. Do you know fractals? Are you familiar with fractals?
Refresh our mind.
I only know them from like pop science, so forgive me for those in math and so forth. But they always use trees as an example. There's like a single leaf, then there's like a branch, and then there's the tree. And they say like these are all like in nature, you will see these things that are fractals, I guess like snowflakes or these type of thing. You might see this where there's these little pieces that are sort of mini versions of the bigger one. So the training process then is sort of like that, where we have the individual workout, the week, and then the month, or you could say like micro, meso, and macro cycles in periodization. And so when we go into a workout, you have like a warm up, then you have the main thing, and then a bit of the cool down. And when we go into the week, you maybe have like an easier workout and then the main, intensity workout, maybe some endurance, maybe a rest, maybe the moderate day, maybe the long day, easing your way out of the work or out of the week as far as intensity maybe. And then year is similar, right? We start with base, you do the race, and then usually it's maybe not quite as much of a cool down, but a lot of the athletes we work with, like the fall is sort of more fun and there isn't like a ton going on. So maybe it is sort of like that, like a warm up, the main season, the cool down. And so you could arrange that in different ways. So with fatigue, generally, you're going to come into the season, hopefully like with lots of motivation, mental energy, and then you're going to have lots of energy, hopefully. Hopefully you're not injured. Hopefully you haven't done a lot of secret training that has you just depleted. This is what, if you go back to the podcast with Dan Cleather that we did, we love Dan Cleather and his little black book of training wisdom. I always say it's not a long book, but if you want to understand training in one book, that's probably the book to get. It's not specific to cycling, but it certainly would cover anything to cycling. And so he talks about adaptive capacity, and that like at the beginning of a season or the beginning of a career, you have a lot of adaptive capacity. You have a lot of potential to get better. What you see is you take kids. I've been having a lot of talks with parents and kids recently because a local youth thing sort of like broke apart. And so there's all these parents and kids are looking for coaches. And so when I try and talk about it, a lot of them want success like today. So they want to do the heat training, they want to do the altitude and the best bikes. And it's my theory, and I think aligned with Dan Cleather, is if you sort of fire hose everything right off the bat, you're going to drown this athlete. They're going to get rid of all the adaptive capacity year one, if not month one. And then probably you won't see as high a peak eventually. And so for the rest of us, if we just go 20-hour weeks right out of the gate, you're going to be super tired, and then you won't finish the season and you won't have the same peak. So we want to ease into that, gradually applying more and more bricks or more and more units of training across the season so that we don't really use up that adaptive capacity so fast, but we can absorb that gradually over the season and then do whatever we want to do in the main part of the season. So then when we go to the week, that's sort of like the seasonal approach. You want to not have a ton of fatigue because eventually that fatigue and the training is going to, as your fitness builds, generally fatigue is sort of like it comes with it, right? And so you sort of then would taper down on the season. I'll stick on the seasonal one for a second. And then that's the taper or the peak. You try and like reduce the volume a little bit so that then the fitness sort of persists for a while. And then you race, hopefully not too tired. Across the week, though, it would be similar. You sort of start the week maybe with a rest day. You have good recovery. You're mentally fresh. Then you go and either do intervals or whatever you do in the middle of the week. And then maybe you're getting a little tired. And then on the weekend, you maybe try and do a bit more moderate work. And then the long ride comes after that. So a lot of times that's what you'll see on the weekly, or would we call that a mesocycle? I guess it's a microcycle. You would see that this, like, you start the week with less fatigue, lots of adaptive capacity, and you train. And you usually have that key session, or what Dan would call the hot session, when you're recovered. And that's like a sort of a general training idea. So this athlete's question is I think mostly correct. You want to be ready for the hot session so that you can push your body as hard as you need to. And that might be a long tempo session that maybe even more requires mental fortitude as much as it requires hitting your VO2 max, but sprint stuff, VO2 max, these are things that are going to require, you can't do them tired. If you don't take enough recovery during the session or before the session, you're not going to get into those higher zones. It's just not going to be a great workout.
Now, I'm going to caveat with I think there are some times where training a little bit fatigued isn't a bad thing necessarily. Because sometimes you're going to be, so in some specific situations, you're going to be racing fatigue. So I think about cyclocross, for example, where you race back-to-back days.
Right.
So in that case, I'd actually say pre-season, you almost would want to be hitting some intervals or some of your harder rides with a little bit of fatigue just to prepare for it.
Right. And so we're at Tuesday, Wednesday in the week. And so then often what you'll see is something inevitably you're going to get to Saturday and you won't be maybe as recovered as you were on the Tuesday, Wednesday, because the weeks happen. This is mental fatigue from your life. This is also the training fatigue has started building across the week. So usually for a younger athlete, Thursday might have something that's maybe a bit more moderate and has a bit more fatigue. And then Saturday might be a bit more moderate, might have a bit more fatigue. And then Sunday is that long ride. So you are training fatigued. And so the debate, this has been the trendy thing, has been this what is this? Durability, fatigue resistance. They're all sort of beating around the same thing. And it strikes me, so that, then people will be like, well, I need to ride for 4 hours and then do VO2 intervals. And so, okay, I do a little bit of that in the season. I think for someone for a gravel racer or something like that, maybe that makes a bit of sense. The Leadville people following the plan and our coaching, we do a lot of what we call hard way home, where it's you ride for a bunch of hours and then you usually are ideally on the wrong side of a mountain and you have to get up and over the mountain. So you do 20, 30, 40 minutes hard at the end of a workout. Or 2x20 or whatever. So just some tired intervals, or let's say tired 20s is a common one in that durability stuff. I'm not convinced that that's the best way to build durability. It sounds a lot to me like when we were doing the fasted workouts and all this stuff, and then, try and build fat burning. And then we realized that actually the people who were just the fittest, just had really good, even though they're fueling a lot of carbs, they also have really high fat burning. And so they sort of just have a bit of both. And so I'm not convinced that doing that specific thing is always the best. And I think gets overdone pretty quickly because, again, the biggest stimulus to adaptation and getting fitter is the intensity. So if you numb or blunt the intensity, that's where people get into trouble. So you'll see the sweet spot in the zone 2 camps ending up with this problem sometimes where just everything is just this moderate burn. And this is coming from someone who loves tempo and moderate. I love it. But I think you just want to be careful that the dose is appropriate. So I was saying to this athlete, if we get to the workout level, we warm up, we're very recovered, even for a day. We're not as tired as we'll be at the end of the workout, almost irregardless of the workout. Then we do intervals. If it's an interval day like VO2 max, 5x3 minutes, you could still, I think if you're training well and you're becoming a more advanced athlete, those would be the days to me where you might actually put 20 minutes of tempo, 30 minutes of tempo at the end of that workout. This is a more advanced thing. This isn't something I would give someone immediately. Maybe on the trainer for a beginner athlete, you do 2 or 3x3 and then 20 minutes of tempo, and that would keep them entertained and sort of spin a bunch of tops, so to speak. But this is sort of an advanced thing where then you would get oh, this is what it's like. I'm tired, but now I actually have to stay on the gas. And so then you would get that. But I think, again, it's not 90 minutes. It's not 2 hours of tempo. And I think you get so much of the benefit doing that versus just every day being super tired type thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
In your training, you do something like not the tired 20s, but the finish moderate or a hard hill after a certain period.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes with the long runs
on Saturday.
Yeah, Saturdays. It's not every weekend.
Yeah, it's not that frequent. But
no, maybe every 6 to 8 weeks, I would say there's one. It's the longest run basically that I have, and then it's finish with 30 minutes moderate.
Yeah, and the Uphill Athlete book is really good. That's Steve Johnson, maybe also Steve House, and I think Killian Jornet is also on that one. I don't see it in our new bookshelf Molly's arranged here. We'll have to get shots of it.
Johnston and Jornet.
And Steve Johnson coached the top woman and top man at this UTMB race we were talking about earlier. So his methodology is really popular right now. And so where was I going with that?
How about a clue?
Oh, he talks about, again, with more advanced athletes. So this is someone who's training a fair bit, like is pretty fit. Maybe your fitness score in Training Peaks might be like 100 or like 90, which most masters do not have that amount of consistency across 6 weeks and that amount of time to do that. But he would suggest that you actually replace some of that zone 2 time with tempo time. Which makes a lot of sense because those people tend to have such high aerobic thresholds that their zone 2 is actually like pretty hard. Like for me, mine goes 240, 250, and it's like you can't ride with people doing 240, 250 watts. Like people will get very grumpy with you normally. So that he's like, at that point, it's so muscular to do that. You'd actually make more sense to do tempo. So in my case, it might be more like 290, something like that, and get that stimulus rather than burning a ton of zone 2. Whereas a beginner just is basically like struggling to stay under their aerobic threshold because it's not enough watts to move them forward. Or in our running example we've talked about where the beginner runner can't actually run under zone 2. So they sort of just have to run, walk, and get enough volume and time to eventually start being able to run and then have any gears, so to speak, any zones that are even worth talking about. So anyhow, Steve, that's a great book too. That's a little more nitty gritty and more specific, obviously, to ultra running and like the skimo mountaineering world, but fantastic concepts in that. It talks a lot about the MAF test, which we love. So did I get through that? So fatigue, it's generally good. I think it's important. I guess the other thing I missed on the seasonal level, we also have phases of the year. So when we go away to a training camp, that's what we're doing. We're accumulating tons of fatigue. We're training way more than normal. Maybe you're still including at least a mountain climb side by side with your friend that's going to be at least moderate. No one's climbing mountains unless they're very fit aerobically. So we're already starting to do these sweet spotty intervals, whether you're calling them that or whether you're just getting up the mountain as best you can. So you're doing fatigued intervals. So I recall Dan Proulx, past national coach for 12 years plus for Canada. I think now with Triathlon Canada, very, very smart coach. He would talk about like at camps, like we're training like this now, which is good and fine and it'll be beneficial, but we don't train like this all the time. And so you need to remember that. But that would be the times where, okay, this week or month, I'm going to put in a big push on volume. There's going to be a bunch of tempo, moderate riding in there. Probably not VO2 intervals because, again, you can't really do them. And that's going to be the focus of that phase. But we want to be careful that we don't get addicted to that and try and do that year round. And we see a ton of that where it's like, I did 20 hours on this camp and I'm just going to keep that dream alive while I'm at home with my family and kids. And that math just doesn't work. There's not that many hours in the day. And again, your body just can't handle that fatigue. You're much better to take the recovery and get good, proper training in. And again, the intensity is the driver. We just can't do the intensity every day. So indeed, those rest days are important. Maybe the last little iteration is that double rest day is an interesting one. And so when I spoke to our friend, he was saying like what he was actually working on is like a bunch of core and a bit of walking and he does a bit of swimming and like that sort of stuff. More of a cross-trainy, like mixed modal day. Probably both of those days, but one day especially has like a bit more time invested in that. And as we were talking, he's had trouble with some back pain and just like muscular stuff, as most people in their 40s, 50s, 60s do. And so he actually is dedicating one of these days in his 2 days off in a row to that. And I said, well, I when I see 2 days off, I generally like, I don't know about that. Like we want to keep frequency up. However, if that's going to be the limiter for him doing his goal, it's a pretty good investment in time. And if he's coming back to the training on the day after the 2 days off, feeling great, and then he's going to go out and really hit those couple intervals or whatever his workouts is on that day, I don't think it's the worst thing. So the analogy I gave him was like, if the frame of the race car is in better shape and isn't going to break down and limit your performance, but the engine is 2% less good because you didn't get in like miscellaneous zone 2 day on that one of those days off that he's taking, it's a pretty good investment. And then do you gain those couple percent back by having the motivated workout on that first day back? So I think it's a fantastic strategy. And again, gets to that, like finding what works for you. And I think this was motivated a bit by work family schedule too. So we always have to take like, is it the perfect thing you draw out in your Joe Frill training Bible calendar? No, but if it works for you, then I would just ride that until it's not working or your schedule with family changes.
For sure. Perfect. Okay, well, let's wrap up there. If you have any questions, we are hitting cyclocross season, so someone ask us about running. You know you want to. You can find us over at consummateathlete.com, at consummateathlete on Instagram, and in the show notes, we have a form so you can submit questions anonymously if you feel so inclined. All right, with that, happy training, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.